the main character, Rick Carter, he was the first one there. He popped in almost kind of not fully formed, because there's a version of this where he's a little different. He's a little bit more of a tough guy, more sort of what you would tend to find in an action thriller. And as I wrote, I kind of realized that wasn't as much fun. I was having more fun making him an action hero who's bad at the action stuff. When I consume anything as far as entertainment, it's to be entertained. I'm really not looking for a message. I'm really not looking for a political viewpoint. I mean, you can have those things and it can still be entertaining when it's dark and gritty, or if it has a certain, political bent to it. But I just have so much more fun when there's something that makes me laugh. I mean, you need that release valve, especially in a thriller, because there's some dark things in The Recruiter.
I had so much fun talking with Gregg Podolski about his debut action thriller, The Recruiter, which is hopefully about to be a series, the Rick Carter series. But I loved this book as much as I love talking to him about it, and it is about Rick Carter. When bad guys need good help, they call Rick Carter. He's a criminal recruiter searching for contract killers, cyber hackers, gun smugglers, and any other assorted villains for hire a European crime boss might need. But when the family he left behind in New Jersey is caught up in a client's plot to monopolize the black market, Rick has to save them from two of his own top candidates, deadly assassins known only as Ghost and The Persian. Fixing his own mess will require a set of skills he doesn't have. Not a problem, as finding qualified help is where he excels. But stepping into action, becoming the hero his family needs, that's new territory. For a man who spent the last 10 years being the best at helping the worst, this may be his last chance to do something right. I love the tension of this book. Rick is still trying to kind of consider himself a good guy, but he's definitely in a bad guy job, in a criminal job. So the tension between that is awesome. I love the character development that you don't always get in these novels that really explains how he got to where he was. And probably my favorite is his snarky tone of voice through the whole book. It really, really, really reminded me of Deadpool, which just made it such a fun experience to read. So I dive into all of that with Gregg, and we really geek out about all kinds of action movies that we also love. So that being said, let's get into it. First, I wanted to get to know a little bit about you before we dive into your book. So when did you know that you wanted to be an author, or when was your moment that was like, I think I want to write a book?
I always wanted to write. When I was a little kid, I had a short story published in Highlights magazine. If you remember, do you remember Highlights magazine?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. It's like the staple of every pediatrician's office everywhere, right? And that was huge when I was a kid. So I wrote a story in, I think it was in second grade. I was 7, called The Horse Raised by Wolves. And my parents submitted it to, they had an editorial page where you could write in stories. Mm-hmm. And it got picked and published when I was the next year, so I was 8 or 9. And it was cool. They did a little article on it in the paper, and they read it over the intercom when I was in school. And that was my first published piece. And I'd always wanted to write after that. Never really got serious about it until I graduated from college. Back in the early 2000s. And then, like every author, wrote a couple books that didn't go anywhere and probably shouldn't have. And kind of okay, I took a shot at it. And then I fell into my day job as a recruiter, and really ended up liking that. Yeah. And I had 2 kids, and 2 kids sort of took away any free time I had. And I also didn't have that burning desire to get out of my day job anymore. So I sort of put the writing thing aside for about 7 or 8 years. And then COVID hit, and we all suddenly had a lot more free time. And I said, well, if I'm ever going to take one more shot at this is the time to do it. And I had the idea for this book about a recruiter, but a recruiter for criminals. That was sort of knocking around my head for a few years. And I said, well, let me just write it. And I did. And that last Hail Mary paid off. So it was kind of cool. I mean, of all the things that come out of COVID that were horrible, you do hear a lot of creatives, had time to finally do things. So there's a silver lining to that. It is that we got some, maybe some work that we wouldn't have got otherwise.
Yeah, I have heard people talk about that in more creative fields, where obviously it is really sad that some people people lost their lives, or have long-term complications as well. But it was people who maybe, like you're saying, didn't have the time otherwise, were kind of like, huh, what is something I'm kind of interested in that I could
Mm-hmm.
try out? That part was
Yep,
definitely
for
cool.
sure. Yeah, you got to look for the good things when you get something like that, and I guess that would be one of them that came out of it.
Yes. Yeah. So, how did your writing process develop as you wrote that book? Like, do you plot? Are you a pantser? How did it
I
look?
think I'm a hybrid. I've been asked that a few times. So
Yeah.
I don't really plot, but I also have my phone is full of notes, and it's sometimes just like a line of
Yeah.
dialogue, or sometimes it's a scene or just an idea. And so I kind of have the story beats on my phone, and then it's from getting from beat to beat is kind of where I pants. That's where things just sort of happen as I write. And then sometimes I get to a beat
Hmm.
and that beat doesn't work anymore, and it's like, okay, well, I got to get rid of that. But so that it's sort of that combo. I don't think I could ever really do a full
Hmm.
outline. I hated outlining when I was a kid. Like, in your teacher in
Yeah.
English made you write the outline first. I always hated that, but I also don't know that I could just
Yes.
sit down and write with no idea of where any of it's going. I think I kind of need to at least have some
Hmm.
like guidelines, you know. Um, at least
Yeah.
for this one, that's how that worked anyway.
Yeah. I just read so many books in June that were July releases that were so good. So I've been interviewing a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people this week, and it's been super common that people do a more hybrid approach. I feel like I'm getting that answer more often, which I kind of think
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. So it's kind of interesting seeing like some people are like I have to write the whole outline, but I've been getting more people saying kind of the version that you
There's
explained
thriller
that
authors I've
works.
heard that write like 30,000 word outlines. I don't have the time for
Yeah.
that. I couldn't even think about doing
Yeah.
that. No, no. I have a few notes on
Right.
my phone. I hope to God my phone never crashes and I never leave it anywhere, because there's entire novels planned out there that
Yeah.
I would now be out of. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like a lot of people probably feel that way about their phones, especially writers at
Just
this
in
point.
general, people about their phones. My 17-year-old daughter would be lost without hers.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Definitely. Just like all she's known.
Hmm.
Um so this one, what I thought was cool is it is pretty character driven, even though it is an action thriller. So how did you approach getting to know your characters?
So the main character, Rick Carter, he was the
Mhm.
first one there. He popped in almost kind of not fully formed, because there's a version of this where he's a little different. He was a little bit more of a tough guy, you know, more sort of what you would tend to
Mm.
find in an action thriller. And as I wrote, I kind of realized that wasn't as much fun. I was having more fun making him an action hero who's bad at the action stuff. I really enjoyed leaning into that,
Yeah.
because that would be me if I was in these situations, and it's written in
Yeah.
first person. So it was kind of fun to put him in situations where he didn't always know what he was doing and he didn't always do the right move. So I kind of had to go back and change the beginning part, and like actually the first 70 pages didn't work anymore, so I had to totally get rid of those. But he came
Mm.
in, and then everything sort of flowed from that world, and who would be fun to have him interact with. And you know, if there was a villain, the villain kind of also had to have fit into that sort of funny but still dangerous world that I was sort of crafting. So all the characters were sort of born from the way he set the table as a character. And you know, very much an action
Mhm.
thriller, but a lot of humor. Like I've been on a Beverly Hills Cop kick. Do you like
Yes.
Beverly Hills Cop movies? Eddie Murphy, the new one just came out on Netflix.
I haven't
It's
seen the
good.
new
It's
one
way
yet.
better than the third one, which isn't a high bar to clear, but it's certainly it's
I've been
it's
hearing
good.
good
It's fun,
things.
and I just love the vibe of those movies. I'm a big Shane Black fan, so Lethal
Mhm.
Weapon, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, The Nice Guys. Like, I wouldn't call any of them comedies. They're definitely action thriller, but
Yeah.
they got a lot of humor, and that was kind
Mhm.
of the requirement for the characters that they wanted to come play in that sandbox. They had to fit in there that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, in my review, I talked about it. It also reminded me of
I
Deadpool,
love.
which,
Thank you
like, I'm
so
very
much for
his
that.
biggest.
Anytime you drop a Deadpool reference, you're on my good side. So, plus, are you wearing a Beach Boys
Yeah,
shirt, by the way? Because I've seen that.
I
I love it. I
am.
was so hoping you were going to rock that, because I rocked the pink power on my shirt too, and I was hoping we would match, and
Yes,
you wouldn't going to show up like in black because it was the recruiter.
I know. It's one of
Yeah,
the
no,
two.
no, I love that shirt, and I'm so happy you wore that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was when I was reading it because I similarly, I love when comedy is blended with
Yes.
action. Like it just makes it so much more fun, especially just because it kind of, I mean, it's like the foil character too, though. Like it keeps it from being so serious all
Mm-hmm.
the time or too heavy sometimes too. And literally when right after I wrote the review for your book, we went and saw the new Bad Guys movie.
Bad Boys,
Or Bad
yeah,
Boys,
yeah,
not
yeah.
Bad Guys. Yeah. And that was the first time we saw there's like a little trailer they're doing for Wolverine
Oh,
and
okay.
Deadpool that's like not a trailer. It's kind of like they like it's a
Oh, I
silence your
saw that.
phone thing
It's
at the
genius.
movie.
Yeah, I love
Okay,
it.
so you've
Yeah.
seen that. Yeah, so we saw that, and I was like turning to my husband. I was like, "I just wrote a book review that mentioned Deadpool. This is so cool." And he's like, "What? Stop talking! Like, what are you? I can't hear
Wolverine is
you."
asking you to be quiet. Shh. Right.
He's like, "You're missing the point of it." But I was like, "That is so cool." I was like, "I just wrote about it, so I can't wait to see that one too." I just love when people sneak comedy into action
Well,
as well. So I
when
loved
I
that part.
consume anything as far as entertainment, it's to be entertained. I'm really not looking for a message. I'm really not
Hmm.
looking for a political viewpoint. I mean, you can have those things, and it can
Yeah.
still be entertaining when it's dark and gritty, or
Hmm.
if it has a certain political bent to it. But
Yeah.
I just have so much more fun when there's something that makes me laugh. I mean, you need that
Yes.
release valve, especially in a
Hmm.
thriller, because there's some dark things in the Recruiter. Like there's some places it goes to, and I had
Hmm.
to be very careful not to sort of minimize what I was talking about. Like human trafficking is an element of
Yeah.
the plot, but I didn't want to make that central because I
Hmm.
didn't want to go. Because in order to treat that the right way, you have to be serious. You can't make a joke around that. So I was very
Yes.
careful to keep that on the margins so that I could keep the humor without feeling
Hmm.
like I was trivializing that. But you need that
Yeah.
release where you kind of go, oh, okay, I can take a breath right here and it's okay to laugh and have fun.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah. And to your point, like he is kind of like he's not someone who participates in action
Not
ever.
willingly. No.
So like yeah, that's kind of like almost inherent to the humor of it all is like he's kind of like the bumbling idiot when it comes to that
Totally.
stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So it sounds like you are an action
Hmm.
fan and movies and everything. Is that kind of what drew you to writing an
Yeah, it's
action
funny. The
thriller?
first couple books I wrote, I was talking about this with somebody else. Like, I think all authors go through a phase where they just sort of ape authors that they like, and you sort of almost try to copy
Hmm.
that voice, and you end up producing like dollar store versions of that, which nobody is never really any good. But that's how you find your own voice. So the
Yeah.
first couple books I wrote, one
Hmm.
was thriller esque, but it definitely had more like John Steinbeck leanings to it, like kind of
Ah.
talking about America. And then there was a horror one, and then
Hmm.
there was one that was straight up like speculative fiction. I never
Oh
really
yeah.
wrote action because I never really read it. I liked watching it. But when I read, I would read Stephen King. I
Yeah.
would read John Grisham. I would read. The closest was probably Elmore Leonard to action, and he's not really
Mm.
action. He's got action
Yeah.
beats.
It's
Yeah,
more
it's more
cozier.
thriller, right? He's more sort of like that crime, true
Hmm.
crime. Um, and then when
Hmm.
I started writing this story, I'm like, well, this is an action thriller, so let me write. And I found that it came so much easier, and everything
Nice.
just flowed more smoothly in my voice. And I wasn't, for the first time, I wasn't like copying somebody else, probably because I never really read in that genre, so I had nobody to copy.
Yeah.
But it came very natural, and it was so much fun. It was the most fun I've had writing any of the stuff that I've written. Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool. Just kind of like finding your natural
Yeah.
lane
Yeah. After
almost.
veering all over the road, yeah, I finally settled into where I should be.
You
Right.
got
Yeah.
there. Yeah. So you mentioned you're a
Hmm.
recruiter yourself, not
No,
a
please
criminal
don't anybody
recruiter,
call the
I'm
cops on my
assuming.
employer. They would not condone anything that Rick does. Yeah.
Yeah. But was that some of the inspiration for the book, or where did the
Yeah, so
inspiration
it's a
come
lot of
from?
like write what you know, right? And I had been doing that for, like I said, about
Hmm.
7 or 8 years when I got the idea. I actually wrote the first couple pages of this um, maybe about 6 years ago. And then it just kind of sat because I didn't have the time. My
Oh
son
wow.
was little, and maybe even longer at this
Hmm.
point. But anyway, I had sort of thought, well, let me write a story about a recruiter because you don't really see them in popular fiction. Joe Nesbo wrote a book called
Hmm.
Headhunters, but even in that book, the profession is sort of he doesn't have to be a recruiter to make that book work, right? Like he could kind of be anything.
Oh, okay, yeah.
He just happened to pick recruiter. But after that, you really didn't
Mm-hmm.
see it anywhere. And I was like, well, this is sort of a gap in the market. And I know I'd love to read a book about my job.
Mm.
But I also didn't want to just write a John Grisham book with recruiters instead of lawyers. Like I didn't want to do a good lawyer who got stuck in a bad situation. I felt that had kind of been done. So I was thinking of how I could make it different. And I came up with the idea of, what would it be like if there was a guy who did what I did, but he did it for criminals? And that character has appeared in a lot of movies. Like there's a horrible but great movie called The Expendables 3. Do you ever watch anything of that franchise?
Yeah. I feel like we saw
The
it in
third one?
theaters. Was it
You need to
years
get your
ago?
money back if you saw that one in theaters. But
Maybe it wasn't.
So the
I can't
third one
remember.
is the one. It's the one with Stallone and all the old action stars, and they kind of get together as like a
I
mercenary
think
group.
we did
Okay.
see it in theaters.
So the
So,
third one
yeah.
has a character in it that's played by Kelsey Grammer. And he kind of, sort of is what Rick is, in that Stallone goes to him to help him find members for his team. And he sort of presents them the way I present candidates to my clients. And I always liked that. But again, he's sort of a good guy because Stallone's team is mercenaries, but they go after bad guys. And so he was helping them find other good guys. I'm like, well, let me do that a little different, and let me do it with a character who, helps find criminals for other criminals. And in any other thriller, that character's maybe in there for a scene or two, right? Like he's sort of the guy the main character finds and beats up to get information, and then he's done. So I really wanted to see if I could structure a whole book around kind of a throwaway character, and then make him really bad at the action stuff and put him in an action story on top of it. That was fun. That was a challenge. The more I thought about, like, this could really be a lot of fun, and it was to write. Hopefully it's as much fun to read, but it was a lot of fun to write.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It was. The synopsis was so exciting to me because of what you're saying. Like we don't spend that much time with that character typically. The closest thing I could think of, because it's what it kind of like got me excited or interested in reading it, is I also love shows or movies with like fixers. So like
I was just gonna say Ray Donovan
type stuff. Yeah. And I just saw, I can't remember what it's called, but it looks like there's one coming out with George Clooney.
It's Wolves on Apple TV's doing it, Apple Plus. Yeah, it looks so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
I know. I just saw that trailer and I was like, oh my gosh. Because I just, it's always so fascinating. That character's always interesting. And it just lends itself well to action because they're dealing with like people who need to cover stuff up most of the time.
And that was important to me. Like I wanted him, like you said, the bumbling idiot in the action scenes. I needed him to also be able to own a certain situation, or else no one's going to follow an idiot the entire time of it unless it's a comedy, right? And it was not going to be a comedy.
Yeah.
So I needed to make him really good when he was in his element, which was working with candidates, working with clients, kind of in an interview situation, in a negotiation. He's really slick and he's really cool and he knows what he's doing. But when he's out of his element, that's when you really can have a lot of fun with him. Like,
Yes. Yeah. Speaking of that, his planning kind of being or orchestrating being the thing that he was good at. I loved this moment when Rick was trying to come up with a plan and he's thinking about it and he says, I had a rough outline of a spy thriller that would feel quite comfortable nestled on a shelf at any airport Hudson News. But in terms of actionable, usable strategy, it was as unrealistic as the plot in those same thrillers. And I loved that so much because I also just really love meta comedy. So did you feel...
Anytime I feel brilliant, my wife is right there to remind me that I'm not. So no, that was like a sales pitch for Hudson News, probably. Like, I'll throw Hudson News in there, maybe they'll carry it. No, it was basically just him. It was a way to show that he doesn't know what he's doing. Like, and again, I would feel like that would be me. If I had to come up with something, I would draw on books I'd read, not things I've done, because I haven't done anything like he needs to do in this situation. So he comes up with things that are kind of outlandish. And then when you step back and look at him from 30,000 feet, it's like, oh, it's a Michael Bay movie. Awesome. This will work. This will be fine. Right.
Yes, exactly. I hope you're enjoying this episode of Bookwild. And if you are, could I ask you a favor? Could you go and rate and review this podcast on whatever platform you're listening? Ratings and reviews make the biggest difference in discoverability of the podcast, and I definitely want to find all of our fellow thriller readers out there. So if you could go rate the podcast and leave a short review, that would make a huge difference. Thank you, and let's get back to the show. Another thing that I loved about it, though, is even though it does have the Michael Bay type action in it, there is a lot more character development than you normally get in a movie or a book like that. So how did you approach like making Rick's backstory and kind of making him still like an empathetic character?
So I always knew, I have a lot of ideas for where this character is going to go. But I knew the first book, the stakes had to be very personal. And I wanted them to be very small. Like there's an element of this book that deals with some smuggled material that could get in the wrong hands and do some real damage, like city level type damage. And I had been asked by my agent, and I think my editor might have brought it up too, could we expand on that? And I never really wanted to make that the focus. I didn't want the focus to be Rick has to save the world. I wanted it to be very much Rick has to save this tight group of people he cares about, and that's all he cares about. So it was very much, it was always going to be his family was going to come into it in some way. And I also knew that by the end of the book, he needed to sort of have the arc where he started off as a guy who you would never think would be doing the things he's doing for a living. And then not very happy with himself about that, not really loving who he's become. And by the end of the book, not totally over that, but sort of making some peace with it. Right. And so that was always going to be a big part of the story, and you can't tell that story unless you delve into character. And it's also the first book stuff where a lot of authors, they put their own life in the first book. So his family, while not exact doppelgangers for my family, like when I would write the scene, I would think of my daughter or my son or my wife. And that sort of helps make the emotions, I think, a little more honest when you're kind of thinking about them that way, even though they're different names and slightly different personality traits. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like because it's going to be a series.
Ideally,
correct?
Blackstone's got the second book. They're just waiting to see how this one does. But I would love to keep this like as a book a year kind of thing. And as long as people want to read it, I want to write them. So, yeah.
Yeah. So for a first book, that's kind of the cool part is like it did focus on, it is kind of like focused on his origin story too. And so you are getting to know like the people he left behind, like you're getting to know those kinds of things. So it also kind of makes sense for a first book as well.
I wanted to tell the origin story without making it an origin story. That's why it picks up 10 years after he's sort of got into this life. And then you sort of get flashbacks of what he was before and kind of hints of how he did it. There's a book down the road that I would do that in my head is like a true prequel where you see that happen.
Oh, yeah.
But I didn't want to jump in with that. I wanted to have the world and the characters established before we went backwards.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's tons of action scenes. It is an action thriller. And one of the kind of cool things for everyone listening was the way I heard about your book was during a Thriller Fest recap with Lori Brand and Olivia Day Wallace. So that's another episode if people want to go
Lori's
listen
awesome,
to it.
by the way.
Lori was talking about...
I met her at Thriller Fest. She came up, and I didn't realize until I connected with her on Instagram that she's also like completely badass bodybuilder who would destroy me in a fight. Like she is no joke, and I just think she's fantastic. I love following her, and I love the interview you did with her. She was great. Yeah.
Yes, she's so personable. She was so easy to talk to too. On top of all of it. But she was saying her favorite panel that she went to was one about writing action scenes where you and someone else actually kind of like acted out a scene. And so then that made me interested in your book, and I requested on NetGalley and I got it. And I was like, well, this is a cool through line, the way everything kind of came together. But how do you approach writing action scenes? Do you act them out?
No,
like,
it was
you were there.
It was funny. One of the guys who acted that out was a stuntman, and he's got a book on submission.
Yes, that's what it was.
Kind of like Fall Guy-esque, where the stuntman is the main character, and you love that movie. Oh, so good. Yes, so good. That tone is exactly what I was hoping to go for with The Recruiter. Like that it nailed it. But he said he blocks out scenes, and Yasmin Ongo, who provided a blurb for my book and has done an excellent the Nina Knight trilogy, she said
Love
she's
it.
blocked things out like in her office. If for me, it's all in my head.
Yes.
It's more somebody, I can't remember who it was, but described writing a book as watching a movie in your head and just writing down what you see. And then every time you hit a stopping point, you just hit and pause on the movie. And then when you come back in, you hit unpause and you start typing again. That's the closest I've ever come to hearing anything that describes how I write. So it's all mental, and I just kind of see it. And then when I look at it on paper, I'll look at it and go, all right, well, maybe that doesn't make a lot of sense. And even in that fight scene, it was a good lesson, because when they were acting out one part, they acted a different way than was written. And it was like, oh, I thought I was clear there, but apparently not, because I was reading it to them and they did something different. So it doesn't always translate, but I don't block anything. I don't stand up and, have somebody come in, and it's definitely all watching the movie in my head and then writing down what I see.
Yeah. That's what Yasmin was one of the first interviews I did when her first Lena Night one came out years ago. And I was cracking up just because she was saying that. Like, she literally is like moving around her office and her family's like walking by, like, what are you doing? I thought you were
she's this petite, tiny, sweet little person. And I'm picturing her doing like Ethan Hunt moves in her office, right? Like, yeah.
Yes. I know. I was so surprised by that answer. I think it was what I even pulled for the teaser, because I was like, this is just too good. Yeah, I love her. And I'm excited. She wrote, I think it's like kind of a domestic
she did a pivot.
Or it's just like more. Yeah. And it was an Amazon first reads pick. So if anyone has
not what she seems.
What is it? If you're a Prime reader, you can pick it for free. The digital version.
Is it not what she seems? Is that what it's called?
Yes,
no, it sounds really cool, and she's a fantastic writer and a better person. So definitely recommend anybody check that out.
Yeah, I'm excited to read it. I snagged it when I saw it came through, as a first pick, basically. So one of the chapters at the beginning ends with Rick saying, there were no good people in this business, but I want to be the first. So how did you approach balancing that tension of him like being a recruiter for like bad tasks, but still being a good person, like at the end of the day that we were rooting for?
It was actually that line was a reason given to me by a very prominent, very nice agent that I pitched to at Pitch Fest for Thriller Fest back when it was all still remote and we were doing it over Zoom. He requested the pages, the full manuscript, and I actually already had an offer pending from my current agent, and so he agreed to read it very quickly. And he came back and he was like, that line is the reason I don't think I could rep this, because there aren't any good people in this book. He's like, and he was one of the ones who wanted me to do it like a John Grisham book. He like, can't we make him like, Mitch McDear from The Firm, where he's a good recruiter and he gets sucked into. I'm like, no, that's not the point. Is he's a good guy who got into his situation because he made some really poor choices for good reasons. Like his intentions for doing it were all the kind of things that we could all empathize with, but they were completely bad choices. And I feel like that happens so much more than a good person getting stuck into a bad situation through no fault of their own. Like that makes for good stories, but it also isn't very realistic. And not that a lot of this is definitely a hyper reality book, right? Like that's the fun of it. You don't want to make it super realistic, but to empathize with him, I felt more people could relate to a guy who just made a couple really bad choices and it spiraled way out of his control. And now he's sort of stuck. Yes. And he also happens to be really good at the bad choices that he made. And it's more interesting to me to have a guy who at his heart is a good person and doesn't want to do those things, but is also really good at them. And because that was the other thing with the Breaking Bad, like with Walter White, he ends up loving. That's what I was going to say. He loves becoming Heisenberg, right? Like you get the sense that's who he was always meant to be. Whereas in Rick's case, he doesn't really want to be what he's become. He would love nothing more than to go back to what he was, but he can't. He's too deep now. And that's where I think, and then also making him funny. When somebody's funny, good or bad, you relate to them. That's why the villains in movies that are funny, people love them. Like Nicholson in Batman, right? Like it's just, if you're funny, people like you. So it was very crucial he had a sense of humor. And it was very crucial that he got into this in a way that a lot of people I felt could go, okay, yeah, I could see myself doing something similar. And then how would I handle that? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is what I loved about Breaking Bad, because it's like, especially when you're in the early
Mm-hmm.
seasons, he's not, he hasn't completely broke bad. It's just like a
Mm-hmm.
little bit, but the way that you like go through the journey with him, you totally understand why he did what
Mm-hmm.
he did. And then you kind of get to the point where he's to the point of no
Right.
return and is like, oh, I actually
Yeah, and he
really like
loves
this.
it. Like
But
he totally embraces it. Yeah.
yeah,
Whereas Rick is constantly
yeah, it's
fighting against who he's become, but
mm-hmm.
also has to be good at it, or else the people he works for no longer have a use for him. So if he stops being good at what
Yes.
he does or tries to get away, he's dead, and he doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
like that option. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And without giving away any spoilers, it's like there is a reason, like you're saying, for what he did. And it's like, I think everyone can identify with like when you're in a more
Mm-hmm.
desperate moment, like you're kind of willing to do things you're not normally
Mm-hmm.
willing to do. And then sometimes, like in this case, then it kind of gets away
Mm-hmm.
from you. And like you're saying, then you're just stuck kind of
There's a
because of
book
what
that
you
I
did.
blurbed, also came out from Blackstone. The author, M.M. DeWill, is a filmmaker from South Africa, and it's his first novel, and he and I share an agent, and I was asked to blurb it, and the whole book is about that. It's about a woman who is sort of in the most desperate situation anybody could imagine, and is presented with this
Mm,
opportunity that requires her to do something pretty horrible, and she takes it, and then it's the
mhm.
fallout of that. And it's such a relatable
Yeah.
situation for so many people that you have to justify in your
Yeah.
head doing something that you know is wrong, but for the right reasons. And then it's very rare
Mhm.
that somebody who is not used to making those kind of decisions and being in that world can sort of hold on to that and keep their arms around it. Usually you
Mhm.
make that choice and it completely goes out of control. And now you're stuck sort of trying to keep your head
Mhm.
above water. And that's where we find Rick at the beginning of the
Yeah.
book, really. Yeah.
Yeah. What is
It's
that
called
book
The
called?
Helper.
The one
The
you blurred?
Helper. Yeah, it came
The
out last
Helper.
month.
Okay. I want to check that
It's
out.
written in a very sort of almost like fever dream kind of prose. It's a
Ooh.
very unique take on that story, the way it's written. Yeah, it's hard to
Nice.
describe how he wrote it. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's cool. Well, I've been asking people at the end, you've kind of answered it, if they've read any books that they've loved recently. So has there been anything else you've read that captured your attention?
So I just started reading about halfway through a book called The Second Life of Nick Mason by Steve Hamilton. It's an older
Okay.
book. It came out in 2016. And the
Hmm.
third one of that, which was long delayed, is going to be coming out in August, called An Honorable Assassin from Blackstone, my publisher. And I liked the
Ooh.
idea of this book. It was actually one I had comped to, even though I'd never read it, when I was sending out my own queries, because
Uh-huh.
I heard the synopsis and I knew Steve Hamilton's writing style. But it's about a guy
Yeah.
who is sent away to prison, and again, legitimately, he was guilty of what he did, and he was got
Hmm.
25 years, and he had a wife and a little girl, and he gets an opportunity to get out after only 5 years, but he basically is
Mm.
owned by this criminal mastermind who's in prison and is still sort of running his empire from behind bars. And
Oh.
Nick becomes sort of his hitman muscle guy on the street. And
Oh,
whenever this
wow.
phone rings, he has to answer it and do whatever he's told to do. And even though he's a criminal, he's not
Ooh.
like a killer. And it's about him balancing,
Mm.
I said yes to this so I could see my wife and kid who have since moved on, but also I might be out of prison,
Right.
but I'm also still sort of stuck in a kind of prison because this guy can call me anytime and tell me what to do. And it's a fast read, and
Yeah.
it's a great concept. I'm loving it. I'm about three-quarters of the
Yeah.
way through, and it's really good. Yeah.
Nice. It kind of reminds me, it's not the same thing, but The Night Agent.
Oh, Matthew
I can't
Quirk,
remember who was the guy
the
who
one
wrote
that's on
that.
Netflix.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep. Yeah, how like it really just the part where it's like he just has to
right.
go to that prison no matter what, and then he gets pulled into something he wasn't
Yeah,
expecting. But we blew through that when it came to
everybody did.
Netflix. I
Everybody.
loved that.
That's like, I think they got a
Yeah,
second season coming out, right? I want to say.
I
Yeah,
think
that was
so.
one of the top
Yeah,
ones.
I think that's
Yeah,
what I
I haven't
saw.
watched that one yet. That's on my list
Yeah.
among many others.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
so good. Obviously, I just love action,
And I
so
love that you love
it
action
fits the
because,
bill.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
when you requested me, I was kind of looking at some of your recent ones, like, oh, she's more of like sort of the domestic thriller. But then you interviewed Rob
Yeah.
Hart, and you clearly knew
Yes.
what you're talking about. I'm like, oh, we're good. I'll be in good hands. We'll be all right.
Yes. Yeah, it's one of those things, like, I definitely love
Mm-hmm.
both. And I read, what was the other one that I read here? The Man Who Saw Seconds
Oh,
was by Alexander Boldazar. It
I've
was
heard of that
really
one.
good. It's sometimes it's like, and then I just read one that, because I'm about to interview them. It doesn't come out until September 1st, I think is the release date, but Isabella Maldonado and
Yes.
Jeffrey
Yeah.
Deaver. Oh my gosh. It's called Fatal Intrusion. It was fantastic. So it's one of those things where, like, I definitely love, like, the domestic
Mm-hmm.
suspense and just suspense thriller in general, but when I can find, like, an action one that has some, like, character work in
Mm-hmm.
it too, I just
So
love it.
two things. Isabella was on the panel on
Mhm.
Thriller Fest, and she's
Yes,
such a
I
great
saw that.
person and so funny and so talented. And she was talking about that book,
Nice.
so I cannot wait for that to blow up for her.
It is
Yeah,
so
and
cool.
just the concept of it sounded really cool. And then
Mhm.
my wife, when we first started dating back in the late '90s,
Mhm.
she was kind of like a chick flicky kind of, that was like her
Mhm.
genre. And then she started watching some of the action movies with me, and she is a full
Yeah.
blown action movie aficionado now. Like she knows the Marvel movies better than
Nice.
I do. She can like quote like she's Marvel
Oh,
Wikipedia.
nice.
That to me is like one of the
That's amazing.
biggest things, that a feather in my cap as a husband, like that I was able to convert her
Yes.
to the action side. I loved it. Yeah, she won't even think about watching like
Yes.
a Sandra Bullock movie now that's like Hope Floats or something. Like, no, 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 no. Let me get something with, Harrison
Yes.
Ford in it, please. That'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, my thing is, like, especially with thrillers, I think the reason I love the genre as a whole is the pacing and
Yes.
that, like, stuff is always
Yes.
happening. So I think that's where, like, action is so
And
fun
that
for
was
me
crucial
too.
for me for this one. Is my favorite movie of all time is Raiders of the Lost Ark, and one of the reasons I love it
Hmm.
is there's not an ounce of fat on that movie. It's so perfectly paced.
Yeah.
Every beat matters. Everything that happens. There's no filler, and I really wanted to make this
Yeah.
book kind of flow that way. And I think you mentioned it in your review, and a
Yes.
couple other people on their early reviews have mentioned how fast paced it is, and that was, I wanted to nail that. I
Yes.
didn't want anybody to feel like I can skip this chapter and I won't miss anything. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, you
Thank you.
did. It comes out just swinging. You're like, okay, we're right in
Thank you.
it. You're welcome. Where should people follow you to stay up to date? Because I hope there's gonna be lots
Me
in this
too. Yeah,
series.
it'll all depend on what the readers say. If they want it, I'm sure Blackstone will put more out.
Yeah,
My website, Gregg Podolski.
and the ending set it up so
What's that?
perfectly. And the ending set it
Yeah,
up
and
so
that was
perfectly.
that
Very
was really
quickly.
important to me. Speaking of Marvel, that was sort of my end credit stinger. Like I didn't want to end on a true
Oh yeah.
cliffhanger. Like I know people hate that. I wanted the main story to be wrapped up, but then also to sort of set up the next one, right? And I was really worried they
Yep.
weren't going to let me do it, but they were fully on board with that. Like, no,
Hmm.
we love that.
That's awesome.
So
That was how I described it to my
nice.
friend who doesn't read action thrillers, so I spoiled it for him. I was like, the coolest part is, like, I said that almost word for word. I was like, everything that matters
Mhm.
gets answered for the story that you're in. I was like, and then I read the epilogue and I was like, oh my gosh, this gives new context to everything that happened, and it makes me want to read the next one right
Yes.
now.
All right. Mission accomplished.
Yeah. Hmm.
But no, you can find my website, greggpodolski.com. And then I'm
Hmm.
on Twitter at Bits of Nonsense, which is something I came up with a long time ago. And I figured I'm just going to keep it. I liked it because that's basically what Twitter is.
Yeah,
It's a lot of bits of nonsense. And then
it is.
at Gregg Podolski on Instagram. And I'm trying to be so much
Yeah.
better on social media because I was never really a big social media guy. But
Hmm.
I found that if I just post a book thing and then something goofy that I like or something fun,
Hmm.
people sort of respond to that. But yeah, I'd love to hear from
Yeah.
anybody, and any and all reviews, good or bad, are always appreciated because art's very subjective. You either
Hmm.
like something or you don't. It doesn't make it
It
good or
is.
bad, right? So I understand there's going
Yep.
to be people that are like, "This is garbage," and they write a 1-star review. I'm like, "Thanks for reading, appreciate it." Like
I
just
know.
like the 5 stars, you picked it
Yes.
up and you read it. That's a chunk of time you dedicated to
Yeah.
me. If you didn't like it, I still appreciate the effort.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's a good perspective to
You
have on
have
it,
to.
at least.
Otherwise, this business will beat you up. You have to have that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, I will put all those links in the show notes for
Thank
everyone so
you.
they can keep up with everything. And thank you so much for
Thanks for
talking
having
with
me.
me.
This was a ton of fun, and I'm definitely going to continue following you. You do a great job. I love your interview style, and you bring in
Thank
really
you.
interesting guests. So I'm happy to be a part of it. Thank you so much.